Hi, I'm Damaris Jordan at Clark's Chapel Baptist Church in the studio. I wanted to share a story, another one that is, about my mother. We talk about those we love and the significance of life. It makes me think of a song that says, may my life not be in vain. We all hope that we're remembered after we've left this life and hope that we've left lessons behind, testimony behind, legacy of a mixture of things that will give value to those that knew us. And this particular story is entitled, It's How It All Ends. When we live this life, everything isn't a journey of roses. It can be very hard, and those hard times can take their toll on us. I want to just share a little bit about Mama to let you know how her life was and how things ended up being so different for her, knowing that it could have been different and learning from that, teaching us through it, and just want to give God the glory for answered prayer. The scripture I want to reference is from 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 17 and 18. For our light affliction, which is but for a moment, worketh for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory. Our light affliction, just think of that. While we look not at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporal, but the things which are not seen are eternal. It was very interesting to watch my mother's life. She was so significant in a lot of ways, and you may have heard me say this before, but she at a time of life became wrapped up into one person, grandparents, my daddy, other loved ones that we had lost. It was like she represented all of them. She loved who she loved, and she kept them dear in her heart, and that would spill over in conversations. So through her, I felt like I knew those that I didn't know, grandparents I'd never met, and the story could go on there. But what I want to highlight is that when I think about Mama's life, she lived to be 78 years of age. She lived a pretty healthy life most of her years. In the 60s, her life began to deteriorate some, as it does for so many of us. And at 75, she began the end of her life that lasted almost 3 years through an illness. There were several reasons why my mother's outlook had been affected and became oppressed during part of her lifetime. As you may remember, my mother was from England, so she was separated from her family, from her loved ones. And in her absence, she actually had lost loved ones to death, and knowing that she would never get to see them again. One was the loneliness that she felt, being a widow for over 30 years in her life. And through those years, she spent most of them alone because of my sister and I growing up and moving out to make our own lives. And so she lived alone for at least 25 years. Another one was the distance she felt from the love of her family in England, not getting to see them, and they're not keeping in touch with her after her mother's death. Also, there were changes that took place, as I mentioned, because me and my sister moved out when we were old enough, had our own family situation, and as we aged, things changed there. I certainly had my own children who were growing up and making their own life pathway, and so your habits, your normal routines change, and that can bring on changes within us when we don't feel fulfilled anymore. The final thing that made it difficult to keep a positive outlook was her health conditions. And I want you, as you're listening, to consider this, because sometimes we don't understand why someone feels the way they feel, act the way they act. But it can be side effects of a condition that changes the thought process. It can be medication that does the same thing. And, when we're the ones dealing with it, we might not even understand ourselves to be able to explain it or even to really recognize or see the changes that take place. But even though we knew all of this, there just seemed to be something underlying that I just couldn't put my finger on. I prayed and prayed to see a victory for Mama, especially in those latter 3 years as I saw her health deteriorate. I couldn't bear to see her life end differently than I had known the expression of her life most of my life knowing her. Mama was a very lively person and loved people and extended that love and outreach. She visited people, nursing homes, in homes, sat with sick people, was joyous to be around. People loved my mother. As I watched and listened, though, during those last 3 years, that oppression set in heavily at times. And I watched her slowly change her focus. And in that last 3 years, she had just before that sold her home and moved to a senior citizens facility, the apartment situation, which ended up being so good because of the physical needs that she needed were met there. Providing the, handrails in the hallways and in other areas of the home. But as she was in this situation, I slowly watched her focus. Mama was a homemaker from the get-go. I learned all I know about home making and keeping a home from her. That for me has deteriorated in the latter years due to some of my health situations that limit me in some ways, such as back surgery and what have you. But Mama taught us well how to care for our home. So she was always alert, always surveying the area. But in her final days, her sickness brought her focus into a different range. Where it had been for every room, every placement of everything, it slowly became smaller. Where she would be able to go out and even look out her windows and be conscious of the outside. Soon it was the interior. It was the community room in the apartment complex, but then it was only her own apartment where she could stay that became her focus. And then from the whole apartment, it came room by room, smaller and smaller to her focus. In the end, we, for her benefit and for ours too, we got a hospital bed for her. And soon her focus was so diminished that she only saw her immediate area and the thoughts that came to her mind. It was with each change of focus that she lessened the burden of life and removed some of the things that had discouraged her. So that really tells me that sometimes we focus on the wrong things and they defeat us, whereas we can put our focus on God and the things that are good, which represent Him, and our life can be a lot better. In Mama's final weeks, God did answer my prayer for seeing a change. My sister and I, we cared for her with the help of a couple of ladies that would sit with her while we were at work. And then my sister and I rotated, staying with her in the evenings into the night, and then until the morning where we got up and went to work. And then, of course, with weekends, staying with her full time. It was in one of my times with Mama that she gave the sweetest testimony to me, and from that day lived in total victory and joy until she departed this life for heaven. I'll never forget her words as she said, "If I had only known and let God be so close to me all the time. It is so wonderful and worth it all," meaning her illness, "to be so close to Him now." That was music to my ears, and her expression, her self changed with that newness of closeness with God. It wasn't like snapping your finger and it was just an overnight thing. Little by little, as she unfocused to other things and even to some of her thoughts, the focus then changed to God, and that was the answer to prayer. Mom had always loved God, and I know she knew Jesus as her personal Savior. But things, situations, circumstances had robbed her of some of the joy He had in store for her. I got to hear and see, as everyone did, that in the end, Mama was full of God's love and victory over life in this world and death that brought her to the everlasting fullness of joy with God in heaven. I want you to reflect for yourself. Mama left a legacy to give my children and grandchildren of living. Her life has given me strength to live with courage and hope, knowing that God will always be there for me. There is no doubt. The final focus she had, remember the hospital bed. Her focus became herself in that limited condition of changing her circumstances. Her final focus she had was totally on God, and she knew that all of life could have been lived that way as much as possible. Life does have its interruptions, but she had clung to, by choice, if you want to put those words to it, by focusing on things that defeated her, that she could not change. And we all get hung up with that. I can recall times and things that have done that to me. And we have to fight against that, don't we, with God's help. But that didn't matter now, because it is how it all ends that is remembered in my heart, and is the way that she was welcomed into a better place. It is how it all ends. So whatever life you're living now, if you feel defeated, if you feel like a failure, if you feel like there's things you haven't done in your life, change your focus. Look to God and seek after doing things that would matter in His kingdom. The way that you would end your life would be with fulfillment with God, joy in those attempts that you made. And after all, God sent His Son Jesus to this world to save the world. But how few have accepted Him? Do you think of God as a failure? I don't think so. And I certainly don't think of my mother either as a failure. I was very blessed to have her as my mother, and I'm proud of her. And I love to tell about her to anyone that knew her, or even to those that did not, such as my grandchildren. I hope this story has blessed you some way, somehow, especially provoked you to think of loved ones around you that maybe you feel like you don't understand. But just look a little deeper. Ask God to give you wisdom and help you. And then for the concerns you have for them, go to God in prayer and ask Him to help you help them, and for Him to help them, but them to release and allow Him to make a change in their life. It can only come through Him, really. And then I hope that for yourself, if there's things in your life that, like I said, trouble you because you don't feel like you've been successful in certain things, change it now. Now is the beginning of your end. And so the story can end differently if you will just make the changes that God will show you to make. He certainly has for us. We, as you know, recently moved, and we've started these videos and things that I never dreamed we would get to do, but have been so fulfilling. And I believe they are of God, as I've shared. So I hope you'll be encouraged. I hope that God blesses you through this message. And I do hope you'll let your light shine.